The gunshot that destroyed Sophia Zimmerman's world echoed through the small mining town of Redemption Creek, Colorado. But it wasn't aimed at her. It was fired in celebration by her husband as he rode away with everything she owned in the spring of 1876. The 24-year-old widow stood on the wooden porch of what was no longer her home, the deed and every cent of her savings gone with the man who'd promised to love her until death parted them. Sophia's hands trembled as she clutched the eviction notice. 3 days. That's all she had left before the bank would seize the modest home she'd worked alongside her husband to build over 2 years of marriage. A marriage that had been nothing but a long con, she now realized. Ought to be ashamed of himself, Mrs. Holloway clucked from next door, not bothering to lower her voice. Poor girl came all the way from Boston thinking she'd found herself a good man. Sophia straightened her shoulders. She'd cried enough tears to fill the creek that gave the town its name. Now she needed a plan. With nothing but the clothes on her back and a single silver hairpin her grandmother had given her, she walked toward the town's busiest establishment, the Rusty Spur Saloon. The piano music and raucous laughter spilled out onto the dusty main street as Sophia hesitated at the swinging doors. Ladies of good standing didn't enter saloons unescorted, but Sophia no longer had the luxury of propriety. She pushed through the doors, her entrance causing a momentary lull in conversation, before the noise resumed at double volume. "Well now, Mrs. Zimmerman," drawled Hattie, the saloon's red-haired hostess, "never thought I'd see you cross this threshold." "I need work," Sophia said plainly. "Any work." Hattie's painted eyebrows rose. "Heard about your troubles. Your husband is gone," Sophia interrupted, "and I won't be joining him in ruin." Hattie studied her appraisingly. "Can you serve drinks without spilling them? Can you smile when drunken fools say foolish things? Can you add sums in your head faster than a man can draw a gun?" "Yes to all three." "Then come back tomorrow at noon. Wear something less." Hattie gestured at Sophia's high-necked dress. "Respectable." Sophia spent that night in her soon-to-be former bedroom, altering her second-best dress with shaking fingers and burning cheeks. By morning, the modest neckline was lower, the waist tighter, though still far more conservative than what the other saloon girls wore. She reported for work at the Rusty Spur precisely at noon, stomach knotted with hunger and pride. The saloon was quieter in daylight, with only a few dedicated gamblers hunched over card tables. Hattie showed her how to pour drinks, where to fetch fresh glasses, and most importantly, how to dodge wandering hands without offending paying customers. "You'll get 1 meal per shift and 10% of your drink sales," Hattie explained. "Find somewhere else to sleep. I don't care where, but you can't stay here." Sophia nodded, calculating rapidly. With tips, she might afford a room at Mrs. Peterson's boarding house eventually, but not immediately. She'd have to find somewhere temporary. The saloon filled as afternoon turned to evening. Sophia moved between tables, memorizing orders and faces, learning which miners tipped generously and which ones to avoid. Her feet ached in shoes not designed for hours of standing, but she didn't slow down. "Whiskey," grunted a bearded man as Sophia passed his table, "and something prettier to look at than Thompson's ugly mug." He jerked his thumb at his companion. "Whiskey coming right up, sir," Sophia replied, ignoring the second half of his request. She'd become adept at this selective hearing in just a few hours. As she returned with his drink, the swinging doors crashed open, admitting a tall figure silhouetted against the setting sun. The saloon didn't quiet this time. Most patrons were too deep in their cups to notice, but Sophia found herself pausing, tray in hand. The newcomer stepped into the lamplight, revealing a man who stood out even in a room full of rugged frontiersmen. He wore a battered leather hat pulled low over his eyes, a well-worn duster, and boots that had seen countless miles. A gun belt sat naturally on his hips, neither flaunted nor hidden. But it was his posture that caught Sophia's attention. He moved with the easy confidence of a man who knew exactly what he was capable of and had nothing to prove. Hattie appeared at the stranger's side immediately. "Mason Hayes," she said, loud enough for Sophia to hear. "Thought you'd be up north by now." "Change of plans," he replied, his voice deep but quiet. Sophia continued her rounds but found herself glancing toward the newcomer throughout the evening. He played cards sparingly and drank even less, seeming more interested in conversation than carousing. Several times she caught him watching her, his expression unreadable beneath the shadow of his hat brim. Near midnight, when her arms felt like lead and her smile had long since frozen in place, Sophia approached his table to clear empty glasses. "New in town?" he asked as she reached for a glass. "Not new," she replied. "Just new to this work." "Sophia Zimmerman," he said. It wasn't a question. She stiffened. "Have we met Mr. Hayes?" "No, madam. But news travels fast in small towns." His eyes, she now saw, were a startling blue against his sun-darkened skin. "Heard about your husband." Sophia's hand tightened on the empty glass. "Then you've heard all you need to know. Will you be wanting another drink?" "No, thank you," he said, then added more quietly, "What will you do when they take your house?" "That's not your concern," she replied, stacking glasses with more force than necessary. "No," he agreed. "It isn't." She started to turn away when he spoke again. "I've got a proposition for you, Mrs. Zimmerman." Sophia froze, then slowly faced him, her expression hardening. "I may work in a saloon now, Mr. Hayes, but I am not for sale." To her surprise, he looked genuinely shocked, then embarrassed. "That's not, I would never suggest." He cleared his throat. "I'm tracking someone, a man who stole something valuable from my employer. I believe your husband may have information on his whereabouts." "My husband and I weren't exactly on speaking terms when he left," Sophia said dryly. "Still, you might know more than you realize," Mason pressed. "I'm authorized to offer compensation for information." Sophia considered him for a long moment. "How much compensation?" "Enough to keep a roof over your head while you find your footing." She set down her tray and took the empty chair across from him. "Tell me more, Mr. Hayes." They talked for nearly an hour, Sophia stealing moments between serving other customers. Mason explained he worked for the Western Detective Agency, tracking thieves, swindlers, and occasional murderers across the Western territories. His current quarry was a man named Victor Reeves, wanted for stealing a significant sum from a bank in Denver. "Your husband didn't rob the bank," Mason clarified, "but he's been seen with Reeves. They might be working together." "Edward always did find the worst sort of friends," Sophia muttered. "I don't know any Victor Reeves, but my husband did mention heading to Silver Gulch. Said there was easy money to be made, sir." Mason nodded slowly. "That helps. Silver Gulch is a 3-day ride from here." "What will happen to Edward when you find him?" Sophia asked, surprising herself with the question. She shouldn't care. "Depends on his level of involvement," Mason replied honestly. "If he's just running with Reeves, probably nothing more than questioning. If he had a hand in the robbery, then he'll get what he deserves," Sophia finished coldly. The saloon was emptying, only the most determined drinkers remaining as the night wore on. Sophia glanced toward Hattie, who was watching their conversation with undisguised curiosity. "I should get back to work," she said, rising from the chair. "Of course." Mason reached into his vest pocket and withdrew several bills. For the information about Silver Gulch, Sophia stared at the money more than she'd earn in a week at the saloon. "I can't accept that for so little." "Consider it an advance," he said. "I may have more questions before I leave town." She hesitated, then took the money, tucking it securely into her bodice. "When will you go after them?" "Soon," he said. "First light tomorrow." Sophia finished her shift and stepped out into the cool night air, exhausted, but with a flicker of hope she hadn't felt since seeing Edward ride away. The money from Mason would buy her time, perhaps even enough to find more respectable work. She walked toward her former house, trying not to think about the fact that this was her last night there. The street was deserted, most of the town long asleep. When she reached her porch, she froze at the sight of a figure sitting in the darkness. "Mrs. Zimmerman," Mason Hayes said, rising from her porch chair, "I apologize for startling you." "Mr. Hayes," she replied, hand pressed to her racing heart. "What are you doing here?" "I've been thinking about our conversation," he said, "and I've decided to offer you a different proposition." Sophia tensed, her hand reaching for the door handle. "Come with me to Silver Gulch," he said quickly. "You know your husband better than anyone. You might recognize places he'd hide, people he'd contact." "You want me to help you track my husband?" Sophia asked incredulously. "I'm a saloon girl, not a detective." "You're a woman who's been wronged," Mason countered. "And you need money more than pride right now." That stung, though it was undeniably true. "I've never tracked anyone in my life." "You don't need to. That's my job. I just need your knowledge of Edward. And I'll pay you $50 when we find him, regardless of the outcome." $50. It was nearly 2 months' wages at the saloon, enough to start over somewhere else, perhaps even back east. "When would we leave?" she asked, still uncertain. "First light," he repeated. "Pack light, 1 bag only." Sophia considered the proposition. Traveling alone with a man she barely knew was scandalous at best, dangerous at worst, yet staying meant continuing at the saloon until she could save enough to leave, which might take months. "I'll need to inform Hattie I'm leaving," she said finally. "Already done," Mason replied. "I stopped there before coming here." Sophia raised an eyebrow. "Rather confident I'd agree, weren't you?" For the first time she saw him smile, just a slight quirk of his lips, but it transformed his face. "Hopeful, Mrs. Zimmerman." "Not confident." "Very well," she decided. "I'll be ready at first light." "I'll collect you then." He touched the brim of his hat and turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing. Where we're going isn't always safe for a lady. Do you have any trousers?" Sophia blinked at the unexpected question. "Trousers? Of course not." "Then we'll need to remedy that before we leave," he said matter-of-factly. "Get some sleep, Mrs. Zimmerman. Tomorrow will be a long day." True to his word, Mason appeared at dawn, leading 2 horses, his own sturdy bay gelding and a smaller chestnut mare. Sophia emerged from the house, wearing her most practical dress and carrying a small carpet bag containing the few possessions she couldn't bear to leave behind. "Good morning, Mr. Hayes," she greeted him formally, despite the impropriety of their arrangement. "Mrs. Zimmerman," he replied with a nod. "I've brought something for you." He handed her a bundle wrapped in brown paper. Best I could find on short notice. Inside the package, Sophia found men's clothing, a flannel shirt, canvas trousers, and a worn leather belt, all clearly too small for Mason, but still much too large for her slender frame. "Put these on," he instructed. "You can change inside. I'll wait here." Sophia hesitated only briefly before taking the bundle back into the house. The clothing felt strange against her skin, rough and heavy compared to her dresses. She cinched the belt as tight as it would go and rolled up the trouser legs and shirt sleeves. Looking in her bedroom mirror, she barely recognized herself a woman playing dress-up as a boy. When she emerged, Mason gave her an appraising look. "It'll do for now. We'll find something better in Silver Gulch." He showed her how to mount the mare, explaining the basics of riding as though she'd never been on a horse before. Sophia had ridden occasionally as a girl in Boston, but those had been gentle, ladylike rides through manicured parks. This would be different. As they rode away from Redemption Creek, Sophia felt a curious mixture of fear and exhilaration. She cast one final glance at the house she'd called home, the only tangible thing she'd had to show for 2 years of marriage. "You'll be back," Mason said, misreading her expression. "No," Sophia replied with surprising certainty. "I don't think I will." They rode steadily through the morning, Mason setting a pace that was challenging but not punishing for Sophia's limited experience. He was a patient teacher, offering occasional advice on her posture or grip, but otherwise leaving her to find her own rhythm with the mare. "She's a good horse," he commented when they stopped to rest near midday. "Gentle, but not lazy. She'll take care of you if you treat her well." "Does she have a name?" Sophia asked, stroking the mare's neck. "Penny," Mason replied. For her color, they ate a simple lunch of jerky, hard bread, and dried apples. Sophia was surprised by how hungry she felt, the morning's exercise having awakened an appetite she hadn't experienced in days. "Tell me about your husband," Mason said as they ate. "Not the ending, the beginning. How did you meet?" Sophia stiffened. "Is that necessary?" "It might help me understand him. Predict his movements." She sighed, breaking off a small piece of bread. "We met in Boston. I was working as a shop girl in my uncle's bookstore. Edward came in looking for books about the West. He was so different from the Boston men I knew, confident, adventurous, full of stories about frontier opportunities." "And he convinced you to come west with him?" "My parents had died the year before. My uncle was kind, but Boston held too many memories." Sophia shrugged. "Edward painted such a picture of our future together, a home of our own, land, prosperity, adventure." "And when did you realize it wasn't what he promised?" Sophia smiled bitterly. "The day after we arrived in Redemption Creek. The business opportunity he'd described turned out to be a half share in a played-out silver mine. The house was a one-room shack with a leaking roof. The land was rocky and unsuitable for farming. Yet you stayed." "I had nowhere else to go," she said simply, "and I'd made vows." Mason nodded, his expression thoughtful but unreadable. "We should keep moving if we want to make Willow Creek by nightfall." They continued their journey through rugged but beautiful country. Sophia's muscles protested the unaccustomed activity, but she refused to complain. The discomfort of riding was preferable to the humiliation of serving drinks to men who saw her as nothing more than an object of entertainment. By late afternoon, dark clouds were gathering on the horizon, and Mason began scanning the landscape with increasing frequency. "Storm coming," he observed. "We'll need to find shelter soon." "How far to Willow Creek?" Sophia asked. "Too far," he replied grimly. There's an old line shack about a mile east of here, used by ranchers during cattle drives. It won't be comfortable, but it's better than getting soaked. The first fat raindrops were beginning to fall as they reached the line shack, a crude one-room structure built of rough-hewn logs. Mason dismounted quickly, helping Sophia down before leading the horses to a lean to shelter on the side of the cabin. They barely made it inside before the skies opened. Rain hammered on the shake roof as Mason struck a match and lit a stub of candle he found on the crude wooden table. "Home sweet home," he said dryly, surveying the sparse interior. There was a narrow cot against one wall, a small iron stove, and little else, save for some abandoned supplies, coffee, beans, and a dented pot. "I'll check the horses," Mason said, pulling his hat lower. "See if you can get a fire started in that stove." By the time he returned, dripping wet despite his duster, Sophia had a small fire crackling in the stove and was heating water in the pot. "Found some coffee," she explained as he removed his wet coat and hung it near the stove. "I thought we could both use something warm." "Good thinking," he replied, removing his gun belt and hanging it on a peg by the door where it would be easily reached. They sat in awkward silence as the coffee brewed, both acutely aware of their improper situation. Alone in a one-room cabin with a single bed, miles from civilization, they were breaking every social convention Sophia had ever been taught. "I'll sleep on the floor," Mason said abruptly, as if reading her thoughts. "You take the cot." "Thank you," she replied, relieved he'd addressed the issue first. He poured coffee into 2 tin cups he'd pulled from his saddlebags. "It's not Boston tea, but it'll warm you up." "I haven't had Boston tea in 2 years," Sophia said with a small smile. "I've grown accustomed to frontier coffee." The rain showed no sign of letting up as darkness fell completely. Mason unrolled his bedroll on the dirt floor while Sophia perched uncomfortably on the edge of the cot, still dressed in her borrowed men's clothing. "You should try to get some sleep," Mason advised. "We've got another long day ahead tomorrow." "Mr. Hayes," Sophia said suddenly, "why did you really ask me to come along? And please don't tell me it's because I know my husband. You're clearly an experienced tracker. I doubt you need my help finding anyone." Mason studied her for a long moment before answering. "You're right. I don't need your help tracking your husband, but I thought you deserved the chance to confront him if you wanted it, and the opportunity to start fresh with the reward money." "That's unexpectedly kind." "Don't mistake it for kindness, Mrs. Zimmerman. I've seen what happens to women left in your position, the choices they're forced to make. No one should have to make those choices." Something in his tone suggested personal knowledge, but Sophia knew better than to pry. "Well, whatever your motivation, I'm grateful for the opportunity." She lay down on the narrow cot, still fully dressed, and pulled the single rough blanket over herself. Sleep seemed impossible with a strange man just feet away, but exhaustion soon overcame propriety, and she drifted off to the sound of rain on the roof and Mason's steady breathing. Sophia woke to sunlight streaming through cracks in the walls and the smell of coffee. Mason was already up tending to the horses outside. She quickly straightened her rumpled clothing and attempted to smooth her hair into some semblance of order. "Morning," Mason greeted her when he returned. "Storm's past. Should have clear riding today." They ate a breakfast of jerky and the last of the bread, then packed up their few belongings. Before mounting up, Mason surprised her by offering her his revolver. "Do you know how to use this?" he asked. Sophia shook her head. "I've never fired a gun." "Then it's time you learned." He showed her how to hold it, explaining the mechanics of loading, aiming, and firing. "Always treat it as if it's loaded, even when you know it isn't." After a brief lesson, he had her fire at a knot in a distant tree. The recoil surprised her, and her shot went wide, but Mason nodded approvingly. Good start. We'll practice more later. For now, keep this with you. He handed her a smaller revolver from his saddlebag. It's loaded. Don't use it unless you have to, but if you do need it, don't hesitate. Do you expect trouble? Sophia asked, carefully tucking the weapon into her borrowed belt. I always expect trouble, he replied. That way I'm rarely disappointed. They rode through terrain that grew increasingly rugged as they approached Silver Gulch. Mason explained that the town had boomed briefly with a silver strike 5 years earlier, but was now declining as the mines played out. The kind of place men go when they're running from something, he explained, or looking for a quick fortune without too many questions asked. Sounds like exactly the sort of place Edward would go, Sophia remarked. By mid-afternoon they crested a ridge and saw Silver Gulch spread below them, a haphazard collection of wooden buildings clinging to the sides of a narrow valley. Even from a distance, it had a rougher, more desperate feel than Redemption Creek. We'll need a story, Mason said as they prepared to ride down. Husband and wife passing through is safest. Fewer questions. Sophia tensed. Husband and wife? Just for appearance's sake, he assured her, and only while we're in public. She nodded reluctantly. What should I call you? I can hardly call you Mr. Hayes if we're supposed to be married. Mason will do, he replied. And I'll call you Sophia if that's acceptable. It's acceptable, Mason. His name felt strange on her tongue, intimate in a way that made her cheeks warm slightly. She told herself it was merely the sun. They rode into Silver Gulch as the day was waning, drawing curious glances from the few people on the muddy main street. Mason led them directly to a weathered 2-story building with a sign proclaiming it the Silver Dollar Hotel and Saloon. Wait here, he instructed, dismounting and tying both horses to the hitching post. He helped Sophia down, his hands strong and sure at her waist. Inside the saloon, Mason approached the bar while Sophia hung back, uncomfortable in her male attire, despite the practical advantages it offered. The barkeeper, a heavy-set man with an impressive mustache, eyed them both suspiciously. Need a room, Mason said, placing coins on the counter. For me and my wife. The barkeeper's eyebrows rose as he looked at Sophia's clothing, but the money was apparently persuasive enough. Only got one room available, at the end of the hall upstairs. That'll do, Mason replied, taking the key the man slid across the bar. We're also looking for someone. Man named Edward Zimmerman. Might be traveling with another fellow called Reeves. The barkeeper's expression revealed nothing. Lot of men pass through. Don't recall those names. Mason nodded as though he'd expected this answer. If you do recall, we'll be around for a few days. He guided Sophia upstairs to a small room containing a double bed, a washstand, and little else. The window overlooked the main street, affording a view of most of the town's businesses. You should rest, Mason said, setting down his saddlebags. I'll make some inquiries around town, see if anyone's more talkative than our friend downstairs. What should I do? Sophia asked. Stay here for now. We'll need to find you some better-fitting clothes if you're going to be convincing as my wife. He hesitated, then added, Lock the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone but me. After Mason left, Sophia explored the small room, trying to ignore the single bed that dominated the space. The impropriety of their arrangement had seemed less significant when they were alone in the wilderness. Here, in a town with other people, even people of questionable character, the pretense of marriage felt more like a deception. She washed her face and hands in the basin, wishing for a proper bath after 2 days of travel. Her reflection in the small, spotted mirror showed a woman she barely recognized, hair escaping its pins, face sunburned across the nose and cheeks, eyes tired but somehow clearer than they'd been in months. Mason returned an hour later with a bundle of clothing. "Best I could find," he said, handing it to Sophia. "Woman at the general store, guessed your size." The bundle contained a simple calico dress, not new but clean and well made, along with a few necessary undergarments. There was also a pair of women's riding trousers, an unusual garment Sophia had heard of, but never seen worn by respectable women. "Thank you," she said, genuinely grateful to have proper clothing again. "Did you learn anything about Edward?" Mason nodded, removing his hat and running a hand through his dark hair. "He was here all right, him and Reeves both. Arrived about a week ago, flush with cash, made quite an impression at the gambling tables." Sophia's heart quickened. "And are they still here?" "Left 3 days ago, according to the livery owner, heading north toward Deadwood. There's a gold rush on there. So we follow them to Deadwood." Mason shook his head. "They won't have made it that far yet. My guess is they're holed up somewhere in between, waiting for the heat to die down before they show their faces in another town." He moved to the window, gazing out at the street below. "There's a fellow here who might know more. Used to ride with Reeves before he got religion and settled down. I'll talk to him tomorrow." "And tonight?" Sophia asked, painfully aware of the single bed. Mason turned from the window. "Tonight I'll sleep on the floor, same as last night. You take the bed." "That hardly seems fair. You paid for the room." "Fairness has nothing to do with it," he replied. "My mother raised me better than to take a bed while a lady sleeps on the floor." "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." A shadow passed over his face. She was. Sophia changed into the new dress behind a blanket Mason considerately hung across one corner of the room. The fabric felt wonderfully familiar against her skin after a day in men's clothing. "Better?" Mason asked when she emerged. "Much," she replied, smoothing the skirt. "Though I may try those riding trousers tomorrow if we're continuing on horseback." "Practical thinking," he approved. "Now I've arranged for baths to be brought up. You first, then me. After that we should get some food." True to his word, 2 young boys soon appeared with buckets of steaming water, filling the hip bath that was brought in behind them. Mason stepped outside while Sophia bathed, then they reversed positions for his turn. Clean, properly dressed, and feeling more like herself than she had in days, Sophia accompanied Mason downstairs to the saloon for dinner. The food was simple but hearty beefsteak, potatoes, and bread with actual butter, a luxury Sophia hadn't enjoyed in months. "So," Mason said as they ate, "tell me more about Edward. What made him run?" Sophia pushed a potato around her plate. "We'd been struggling financially since we arrived in Redemption Creek. The mine was worthless, as I said. Edward tried various schemes to make money, none successful. Then suddenly, about a month ago, his luck seemed to change. He had cash, new clothes, was talking about investments and opportunities." "Did he say where the money came from?" "He claimed he'd sold his share of the mine to a syndicate. I believed him at first, wanted to believe him. But there were signs." She sighed. "Late-night meetings, mysterious trips, new friends he wouldn't introduce me to." "Including Reeves?" "I never met the man, but Edward mentioned the name once or twice. Called him a business associate." Mason nodded thoughtfully. "So Edward gets money from somewhere, possibly as cut from Reeves's bank robbery, spends some of it living high, then disappears with the rest. Leaving me with the debts in a house about to be foreclosed upon," Sophia finished bitterly. Very gallant of him. Men like your husband rarely consider the consequences of their actions on others, Mason said. They see only what they want and how to get it. And what kind of man are you, Mason Hayes? Sophia asked, meeting his eyes directly. What do you want? He held her gaze for a long moment. I want justice. And occasionally, when the opportunity presents itself, to right a wrong. Is that why you became a detective? A small smile tugged at his lips. I became a detective because I'm good at finding people who don't want to be found. The rest came later. They finished their meal in companionable silence, then returned to their room. The awkwardness of their sleeping arrangement seemed less pronounced this night, both of them tired from the day's journey and full from dinner. We'll head out early tomorrow, Mason said as he spread his bedroll on the floor. After I talk to Reeves's former associate, with luck we'll have a better idea of where they're headed. Sophia nodded, slipping under the covers of the bed. Mason, thank you for everything you've done for me. Don't thank me yet, Mrs. Zimmerman. We haven't found your husband. Sophia, she corrected him. If we're pretending to be married, you should use my given name even when we're alone. For consistency. Sophia, he repeated softly. Good night. Good night, Mason. The next morning dawned clear and cool. Sophia woke to find Mason already gone from the room, a note on the table informing her he'd gone to meet his contact and would return soon. She dressed in the riding trousers and a shirtwaist she'd brought from home, finding the combination strange but undeniably practical for horseback travel. Mason returned as she was finishing her hair, his expression troubled. What's wrong? She asked immediately. Change of plans, he said grimly. Reeves and your husband had a falling out. They separated 3 days ago. Reeves headed north to Deadwood as planned, but Edward turned west. West? Sophia frowned. There's nothing west of here but mountains and wilderness. Nothing except Broken Pine, Mason corrected. Small settlement, more of a way station than a town, and apparently Edward was seen heading that direction with a considerable amount of cash. So we go to Broken Pine? Mason hesitated. I should go to Deadwood. Reeves is my primary quarry. Your husband is incidental to my investigation. Sophia felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. I see. Then our partnership is at an end. Not necessarily, he said, surprising her. I've been thinking. Reeves is dangerous, a known killer. But your husband, while a thief and a scoundrel, hasn't shown violent tendencies. It might be safer for you to pursue him while I go after Reeves. Alone? Sophia asked, startled. You'd trust me to find him on my own? With a few days' head start, finding him shouldn't be difficult. Broken Pine only has one saloon, one general store, and one hotel. He'll be at one of them. Mason reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a folded paper. This is a letter authorizing you to act as an agent of the Western Detective Agency in locating Edward Zimmerman in connection with the Denver bank robbery. Sophia took the paper, stunned by his trust in her. Why would you do this? Because you deserve closure, he said simply, and because I believe you're capable of more than you realize. He reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a small leather pouch, which he handed to her. Expense money. Use it wisely. When you find Edward, don't confront him directly. Locate him, then find the town sheriff or marshal and present that authorization. And if there is no sheriff, then send a telegram to the nearest territorial authority. The address is on the back of the authorization. He paused. Do you still have the revolver I gave you? Sophia nodded. Keep it close, but remember it's a last resort. They parted ways that morning, Mason riding north toward Deadwood, while Sophia turned west on Penny, the little mare now responding easily to her commands. She felt both terrified and exhilarated by her newfound independence, carrying an official authorization and a loaded gun. Broken Pine was a day's ride from Silver Gulch through increasingly rough mountain country. Sophia followed Mason's directions carefully, stopping to rest Penny when necessary, but pressing on with determination. By late afternoon, she could see smoke rising from what she hoped was her destination. The settlement was even smaller than Mason had described, a cluster of log buildings straddling a creek, with a signpost declaring it Broken Pine Station. Sophia rode directly to the crude hotel, a 2-story log structure with a sagging porch. "Looking for a room, miss?" asked the elderly proprietor when she entered. "Yes, please," Sophia replied. "And some information, if you can provide it." The old man squinted at her curiously. "Information costs extra." Sophia placed a coin on the counter. "I'm looking for a man, Edward Zimmerman. Medium height, sandy hair, speaks with an Eastern accent. Would have arrived within the past few days." The old man pocketed the coin. "Might have seen someone fitting that description. Checked in 2 days ago, paid for a week up front." Sophia's heart raced. "Is he still here?" "Far as I know, room 3 upstairs." The old man peered at her more closely. "You ain't fixin' to cause trouble, are you? We don't hold with shootings and such in Broken Pine." "No trouble," Sophia assured him, pulling out Mason's authorization. "Official business." The old man couldn't read, as it turned out, but was impressed by the official seal on the document. He gave Sophia a key to room 2, directly across from Edward's. "He usually takes his supper at the saloon round about 6, the man offered. "If you're wanting to avoid him, that is." Sophia nodded her thanks and went upstairs to the small Spartan room. She sat on the edge of the bed, heart pounding as she considered her next move. Edward was here, just across the hall. The man who had promised to love and protect her, then abandoned her to ruin. At 6 o'clock, she watched through her slightly open door as Edward emerged from his room and headed downstairs. He looked exactly as she remembered, handsome in a conventional way, well-dressed, with the confident swagger that had first attracted her in Boston. Once he was safely gone, Sophia slipped across the hall and tried the door to his room. Locked, of course. She hesitated only briefly before retrieving a hairpin and attempting to pick the lock, as she'd seen Edward do once when they had locked themselves out of their house. To her surprise, it worked after several attempts. Edward's room was a mirror image of her own, but scattered with his possessions: a leather valise, clothing draped over a chair, a bottle of whiskey on the bedside table. Sophia searched quickly, methodically, looking for evidence of his connection to Reeves and, more importantly, the money he'd stolen from her. She found it in a false bottom of the valise, nearly $2,000 in cash, along with the deed to their house in Redemption Creek and her grandmother's jewelry, which she'd thought lost. Her hands shook as she counted the money, far more than he'd stolen from her. This must include his share from whatever scheme he'd participated in with Reeves. Sophia was replacing everything as she'd found it when she heard footsteps on the stairs. She froze, then quickly slipped out of the room, barely making it back to her own door when Edward appeared at the top of the stairs. He stopped dead when he saw her, his face draining of color. "Sophia," he said incredulously, "what in God's name are you doing here?" She lifted her chin. "Hello, Edward. Surprised to see me?" "How did you find me?" he demanded, glancing nervously back toward the stairs. Did you really think you could disappear without consequences? She countered, that I would simply accept what you did. Edward's initial shock was fading, replaced by his usual calculating expression. Look, Sophia, I know you're upset, but if you'll let me explain how you stole everything we owned, how you left me to be evicted, or perhaps explain your association with a bank robber named Victor Reeves. That last name made him pale again. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? The Western Detective Agency seems to think differently. She pulled out Mason's authorization. They're very interested in your recent activities, Edward. Now he looked truly frightened. Keep your voice down, he hissed, grabbing her arm and pulling her into her room, shutting the door behind them. Let go of me, Sophia said coldly, wrenching her arm free. Listen to me, Edward said urgently. You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into. Reeves is dangerous. If he finds out I've been followed. Reeves isn't here, Sophia replied. You parted ways, remember? After your disagreement. Edward stared at her. How do you know about that? I know a great deal, Edward, including where you've hidden the money. He glanced toward the door, clearly calculating whether he could reach his room in the valise before she could stop him. What do you want, Sophia? Half the money? Is that it? I want what's mine, she said firmly. The deed to our house, my grandmother's jewelry, and yes, my fair share of our savings that you stole. And if I refuse? Sophia reached into her pocket and withdrew the small revolver Mason had given her. Then I'll have no choice but to place you under citizen's arrest and await the arrival of the territorial authorities. Edward laughed, though it sounded forced. You won't shoot me, Sophia. You don't have it in you. Perhaps not, she admitted, but I don't need to shoot you to detain you until help arrives. They stared at each other in tense silence, husband and wife now adversaries. Sophia saw the moment Edward made his decision a slight narrowing of his eyes, a shifting of his weight forward. Don't, she warned, raising the gun. He lunged anyway, trying to grab her wrist. The gun discharged with a deafening roar in the small room. Edward stumbled backward, clutching his arm where the bullet had grazed him. You shot me, he exclaimed, more shocked than hurt. You actually shot me. The next one won't just graze you, Sophia said, though her hand was shaking badly. Sit down, Edward. To her surprise, he complied, sinking onto the bed while still holding his bleeding arm. What now? He asked, his voice smaller than she'd ever heard it. Now you're going to give me what's mine, and then you're going to leave. Go to Deadwood, go to California, go to hell for all I care, but you'll leave me in peace. And the detectives? Will they leave me in peace too? Sophia hesitated. She had no authority to make such promises. That depends on your level of involvement with Reeves. Edward's shoulders sagged. I didn't rob any bank, if that's what you're asking. I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong person. Reeves suggested a business opportunity. I didn't know what he'd done until we were halfway to Silver Gulch. Yet you kept your share of the money. He had the grace to look ashamed. I was going to send for you once I got settled somewhere safe. Start over. Liar, Sophia said flatly. You've never intended to include me in any of your schemes except as a convenient facade of respectability. Edward didn't deny it. He simply looked tired. What happens now? Now you're going to get my things from your room, all of them, and enough money to restart my life. And then you'll let me go? Sophia considered. Mason would want her to detain Edward, to have him questioned about Reeves, but looking at her husband now, pathetic, bleeding, Frightened, she found she no longer cared about justice or revenge. She just wanted to be free of him. "Yes," she said finally, "then I'll let you go." 10 minutes later, Sophia had the deed to their house, her grandmother's jewelry, and $500, far less than Edward had taken, but enough to build a new life. She watched from her window as Edward rode out of Broken Pine, heading south rather than north, clearly avoiding any path that might intersect with Reeves or Mason Hayes. Sophia spent a restless night in the small hotel room, alternating between satisfaction at having confronted Edward and uncertainty about what to do next. By morning, she had made her decision. She would return to Redemption Creek, reclaim her house with the deed now in her possession, and use the money to start a small business, perhaps a bookshop like her uncle's in Boston. She was preparing to leave when someone knocked on her door. Wary after the previous night's confrontation, she picked up the revolver before calling. "Who is it?" "Mason Hayes," came the reply. Sophia quickly opened the door to find Mason standing there, hat in hand, looking tired but unharmed. "What are you doing here?" she asked, genuinely surprised. "I thought you were pursuing Reeves to Deadwood." "I was," he replied, stepping into the room when she gestured him inside. "Until I heard a rumor in the last settlement before Deadwood that Reeves was actually heading west, not north, that he'd only separated from your husband as a ruse to throw off pursuers." "So you came looking for me," Sophia realized. "You were worried." Mason nodded. "When I heard a woman matching your description had arrived in Broken Pine asking about Edward Zimmerman, I rode straight here." He glanced at her packed belongings. "I see you found him." "Yes," Sophia admitted. "Last night." "And?" She showed him the deed, the jewelry, and the money. "I got what I came for." Mason's expression remained neutral. "And Edward?" "Gone," Sophia said. "I let him go." "I see." There was no judgment in his voice, just quiet acceptance. "Are you angry?" she asked. "I know you wanted to question him about Reeves." "No," Mason replied after a moment. "I'm not angry. Disappointed, perhaps, that a lead has gone cold, but not angry." "What about Reeves?" "Still at large," Mason said with a slight shrug. "But he'll surface eventually. Men like that always do." Sophia nodded, relieved he wasn't upset with her decision. "I'm returning to Redemption Creek," she told him. "With the deed, I can reclaim my house, and with this money, I can start over." "Is that what you want?" Mason asked quietly. "To return to Redemption Creek?" The question caught her off guard. I hadn't considered alternatives. The house is all I have." "You have more than a house, Sophia," Mason said, his blue eyes intent on hers. "You have courage, intelligence, determination. I've seen it these past few days." Her cheeks warmed at his praise. "Thank you, but those qualities don't provide shelter or income." "They could," he replied. "The Western Detective Agency is expanding its operations. They're looking for agents who can go places men can't, ask questions that would make men suspicious." Sophia stared at him. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm suggesting a possibility," Mason clarified. "One of many open to a woman of your capabilities." "I don't know the first thing about being a detective." "You found your husband when he didn't want to be found," Mason pointed out. "You recovered what was yours. Those are the essential skills of the trade." Sophia sat down on the edge of the bed, mind racing with this unexpected proposition. Where would I live? What would I do exactly? You'd be based in Denver initially, training, learning the ropes. Mason sat beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. After that, assignments as they arise, finding missing persons, investigating frauds, occasional undercover work in situations where a woman would attract less attention than a man. "It sounds dangerous," Sophia said slowly, "and exciting." Mason smiled a real smile that transformed his face. "It's both, often in equal measure." Sophia looked down at the deed in her hands, the house that had never truly been a home. Then she looked at Mason, this man who had shown her more respect and consideration in a few days than Edward had in 2 years of marriage. "If I were to consider this opportunity," she said carefully, "would you be my supervisor?" "In a manner of speaking," Mason replied. "We often work in pairs when the situation warrants it." "I see." Sophia took a deep breath. "I believe I would like to visit Denver before making any decisions, see this agency for myself." "A wise approach," Mason approved. "We can leave today if you're ready." Sophia nodded, suddenly certain this was the right path. "I'm ready." They departed Broken Pine within the hour, riding side by side along the trail toward Denver. The journey would take several days, Mason explained, but the weather was fair and they could make good time. That evening, as they made camp beside a small stream, Sophia found herself studying Mason as he built their fire. There was an ease to his movements, a quiet competence that she found increasingly attractive. "Why did you really come back for me?" she asked suddenly. "The truth, please." Mason looked up from the fire, flames casting shadows across his features. "The truth." He was silent for a moment. "I was worried about you, not just because of Reeves or your husband, but because I've come to care what happens to you, Sophia." The simple honesty of his answer made her heart beat faster. "I've come to care what happens to you too, Mason." He smiled again, that rare, transformative smile. "Then we understand each other." "Not entirely," she said, gathering her courage. "I'd like to know more about you, the man behind the detective." Mason added another stick to the fire. "Not much to tell. Born in Missouri. Father was a lawman, killed when I was 12. Mother raised me alone until fever took her when I was 16. Drifted west. Tried my hand at various occupations before finding my calling with the agency." "And no wife?" Sophia asked, trying to sound casual. "No one waiting for you in Denver?" "No wife," he confirmed, meeting her eyes across the fire. "No one waiting." The days that followed were some of the most transformative of Sophia's life. As they traveled toward Denver, Mason continued her education in tracking, shooting, and observation. He taught her to notice details others might miss: worn spots on a saddle, indicating a rider's habits, the way different boots left distinctive prints, how to judge a person's character from small gestures and expressions. For her part, Sophia shared stories of her life in Boston, her love of books, her dreams before Edward had redirected them toward the frontier. Mason proved an attentive listener, asking thoughtful questions that showed genuine interest rather than mere politeness. The distance between them, physical and emotional, gradually diminished. Each night, their bedrolls were laid closer together. Each day there were more shared smiles, more occasions when their hands brushed while passing supplies or helping each other with tasks. On the 4th day of their journey, they encountered a violent spring storm that forced them to seek shelter in an abandoned miner's cabin. Soaked to the skin despite their oilskin coats, they worked together to secure the horses and build a fire in the cabin's small stone fireplace. "You should change into dry clothing," Mason advised, turning his back to give her privacy. "I'll do the same once you're done." Sophia changed quickly, grateful for the extra clothing she'd purchased in Silver Gulch. When she was decent, Mason took his turn, removing his wet shirt to reveal a torso marked with the scars of a dangerous life. A puckered bullet wound on his shoulder, a long knife scar across his ribs. He caught her looking and smiled wryly. Hazards of the profession. "Does it hurt?" she asked, gesturing to the bullet wound. "Only when it rains," he replied, which admittedly is often enough to be a nuisance. They sat close to the fire, their wet clothes steaming on makeshift racks. Outside, the wind howled and rain lashed against the small, dirty window. "We've come a long way from Redemption Creek," Sophia observed, watching the flames dance. "In more ways than one," Mason agreed. "You're not the same woman who hired me to find her husband." "No," she acknowledged, "I'm not. That woman thought her life was over when Edward left. This woman knows it's just beginning." Mason's eyes, reflecting the firelight, were intensely blue as they met hers. "And what does this woman want from her new beginning?" Sophia held his gaze. "Independence, purpose." She hesitated, then added softly, "And someone who sees her for who she truly is, not who he wishes her to be." "And if she found such a person?" Mason asked, his voice dropping to match her quieter tone. "Then she would consider herself fortunate indeed." The tension between them had been building for days, perhaps since that first meeting in the rusty spur. Now, in the intimacy of the storm-lashed cabin, it crystallized into something neither could ignore. Mason reached out slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Sophia, I want you to know that whatever you decide in Denver, whether you join the agency or return to Redemption Creek, I will respect your choice. And if you'll allow it, I'd like to remain in your life, in whatever capacity you prefer." Sophia covered his hand with her own, keeping it against her cheek. "I would like that very much, Mason." Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question rather than a demand. When Sophia responded with equal gentleness, Mason drew her closer, his arms strong yet careful around her. "I never expected this," she whispered when they finally parted. "When I hired you to find Edward, I never imagined—" "Life rarely follows our expectations," Mason replied, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw. "Sometimes, thankfully, it exceeds them." They spent the night in each other's arms, their connection deepening beyond physical attraction to something more profound, a recognition of kindred spirits who had found each other against all odds. Denver, when they reached it the following week, was a revelation to Sophia. After 2 years in the small mining community of Redemption Creek, the bustling city with its brick buildings, paved streets, and diverse population seemed almost overwhelming. Mason took her directly to the Western Detective Agency's offices, a discreet establishment above a respectable lawyer's practice. There, Sophia met Mason's superior, a stern but fair-minded man named Gideon Parker, who interviewed her at length about her experiences and abilities. "Mrs. Zimmerman has natural talents that can't be taught," Mason told Parker as the interview concluded. "Observation, intuition, adaptability. The rest can be learned." Parker nodded thoughtfully. "We've been considering female operatives for some time now. Certain situations require a different approach than our male agents can provide." He looked at Sophia directly. "Are you prepared for the challenges such work would entail? The danger? The unconventional lifestyle?" "After what I've already endured, Mr. Parker," Sophia replied with quiet confidence, "I believe I'm prepared for almost anything." Parker seemed satisfied with her answer. "Very well, we'll begin with a trial period. 3 months. Training, followed by supervised assignments. If both parties are satisfied at the end of that time, we'll discuss a more permanent arrangement. Sophia accepted the offer immediately, her heart racing with excitement at this unexpected new chapter in her life. Mason secured lodgings for her at a respectable boarding house for working women, where her unusual occupation raised eyebrows, but was not prohibited. He took a room at a hotel several blocks away, close enough for convenience, but far enough to preserve proprieties. The weeks that followed were intense but exhilarating. Sophia's training covered everything from self-defense to lock-picking, disguise techniques to the finer points of Colorado territorial law. Mason supervised much of her instruction personally, but other agents contributed specialized knowledge. Throughout it all, their relationship continued to deepen. They maintained professional demeanors at the agency, but their evenings often found them sharing meals at small restaurants or walking through Denver's parks, discussing cases, philosophy, literature, and their hopes for the future. 2 months into her training, Sophia received a letter from Redemption Creek. Her former neighbor, Mrs. Holloway, wrote that rumors were circulating about Edward's death, killed in a dispute over cards in a Nevada mining town. While the news couldn't be confirmed, Mrs. Holloway thought Sophia should know. "Are you all right?" Mason asked when she shared the letter with him that evening. They were sitting in the small parlor of her boarding house, the only guests at that late hour. "Yes," Sophia said, surprised to find it was true. "I feel nothing really. Not relief, not satisfaction, just acknowledgement that a chapter of my life is truly closed." Mason nodded, understanding without need for further explanation. "What will you do with the house in Redemption Creek?" "Sell it, I think," Sophia decided. "There's nothing for me there now." "And Denver?" Mason asked carefully. "Is there something for you here?" Sophia met his eyes. "There's everything for me here. Purpose, independence." She reached for his hand. "You." Mason smiled, bringing her hand to his lips. "I was hoping you'd say that." "Gold can't buy what I'll give you, Sophia," he said softly. "But everything I am is yours if you want it." "I do want it," she replied. "I want you, Mason Hayes. Not for what you can give me, but for who you are." 3 months to the day after her arrival in Denver, Sophia received her first official assignment as an agent of the Western Detective Agency. She was to pose as a wealthy widow at a Denver hotel where several guests had reported missing valuables. "Are you nervous?" Mason asked as they reviewed the details in their shared office, another sign of her acceptance into the agency's ranks. "A little," Sophia admitted, "but excited, too." Mason smiled at her, pride evident in his expression. "You'll be magnificent. You always are." That evening, after successfully identifying the hotel maid responsible for the thefts, Sophia met Mason for a celebratory dinner at Denver's finest restaurant. He was uncharacteristically quiet throughout the meal, his thoughts seemingly elsewhere. "Is something wrong?" Sophia asked as they strolled back toward her boarding house. Mason stopped walking, turning to face her under the glow of a street lamp. "Nothing's wrong. Quite the opposite." He took both her hands in his. "Sophia, these past months have been the happiest of my life. You've brought light and purpose to days that were once merely duty." Sophia's heart quickened. "You've done the same for me, Mason." "I know our situation is unconventional," he continued. "Two detectives constantly facing danger, living lives that society might question. But I've never been much for convention." From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet box. "I don't offer wealth or ease, Sophia. Just my heart, my name, and whatever adventures we might share. Inside the box was a simple gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond. "Will you marry me?" Mason asked, his voice steady but his eyes revealing vulnerability she rarely witnessed. "Not because you need my protection or support, you've proven you need neither, but because we choose each other freely and completely." Tears blurred Sophia's vision as she nodded. "Yes, Mason. Yes, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into an embrace that promised a lifetime of partnership in all things. They were married 2 weeks later in a small ceremony attended by their colleagues from the agency. Rather than a traditional honeymoon, they requested and received a joint assignment tracking a counterfeiting ring operating along the Kansas-Colorado border. "Most brides would prefer Paris," Mason teased as they boarded the eastbound train. "Most brides haven't discovered the thrill of the chase," Sophia replied, her new wedding ring catching the sunlight. "Besides, we have a lifetime for Paris." "A lifetime," Mason agreed, taking her hand, "though I doubt it will be enough to discover all the wonders you contain, Mrs. Hayes." Sophia smiled at her new name, still strange but increasingly precious. "Nor all the adventures awaiting us, Mr. Hayes." The train whistle blew, and they settled into their compartment as the locomotive began its journey east. Outside the window, the Rocky Mountains receded behind them, grand and immovable. Ahead lay the unknown challenges, dangers, and discoveries yet to be made. But they would face them together, this unlikely pair, the abandoned wife who had found her strength and the detective who had found his heart. Two seekers of truth who had, against all odds, found each other. As the train gathered speed, Sophia rested her head on Mason's shoulder, content in the knowledge that while gold might buy many things, it could never purchase what they had freely given each other: trust, respect, partnership, and a love born of shared purpose and mutual admiration. "Where shall we go after this assignment?" Sophia asked, already thinking ahead to their next adventure. Mason smiled, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Wherever the trail leads us, my love, wherever the trail leads us." And in that moment, Sophia knew with absolute certainty that she had found something far more precious than all the gold in the West, a future limited only by the horizon and a love that would endure beyond the final sunset.